Now, so thank you very much for joining me for lesson number 4 in Diploma in Lightroom. I do hope that you have been enjoying the course so far and seen some improvements in your Lightroom editing and getting familiar with the program and seeing new potential for your photographs and the creative side and maybe perhaps a more professional side as well. Kind of realizing your vision for your photography. We're going to take things further within this lesson. We're going to move on now into having a look at how we can get most from our color photographs, how we can bring our color photographs really to life, and then how we can create really dynamic black and white photographs through Lightroom as well. Have a look at what we are going to cover in this lesson. So we're going to explore hue saturation and luminance, Hsl. So you'll find this in the develop module, and this is where we can control many aspects of our color photographs. We can change the colors using the hue slider. We can add more color or increase the color saturation using the saturation tool. We can change the brightness and the darkness of colors, as we'll see as well. We can also use this for converting to black and white, and converting photographs to black and white isn't as straightforward as simply just removing saturation from a photograph, as we will see. It's not the most effective way of converting a photograph to black and white, and we'll be using the hue, saturation and luminance sliders to create black and white photographs. We'll have a look at how to add some effects to our photographs. Okay, so we'll have a look at how to add things like grain, vignettes, and we'll also have a look at how to split tone our photographs too. And both these can be added to color photographs as well, not just to our black and white photography. So I'll just take one moment now just to open up the Lightroom interface. Now, as usual, I have made a quick collection just before the lesson, just to speed things up for us. And these are the photographs that we are going to work on this evening. So we'll kick things off by having a look at this color wheel. Okay, so this is a very, very useful tool that we can use for understanding how the Hsl works. Okay, so if you're familiar with any type of design or anything like that, you're probably very familiar with color wheels. Now what we can see here, this one is broken down into lots of different sections and segments for us to understand. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is the actual Hsl panel, which you'll find in the develop module. Okay, so Hsl stands for hue, saturation and luminance. We've also got color, which is just an alternative way of looking at it. Okay, so you can see we've got hue, saturation and luminance, but we're just looking at individual colors this way. We also have a black and white quick conversion that we can use here as well. Okay, but we'll come back to that now in a moment. Now, with hue, saturation and luminance, we've got these three different sections that they're broken down into: hue, saturation and luminance. The first one is hue, and what hue is basically it's the color, and we can change that color. Now it's limited. Okay, we couldn't change a red to a blue. Okay, but we do have some control. If we have a look at our colors here, so red, orange, yellow, green and so on. With the red slider, okay, if we slide that over, you can see it moves into yellow. Go the other way, it's kind of going into more pink. Have a look at red on the color wheel and you'll see that it's got orange and goes into yellow, and we've got on the other way going into pink. Okay, so with this you can change the color of red or the color of orange or yellow to whatever color is left or right of it on the color wheel. Okay, and it'll always be the same. All color wheels are the same. This is how they're made. So if I begin to change the red, let's just see what happens. And indeed, when I move it over to the right hand side, we can see now it's become more orange. If I move it the other way, it's going to become much more pink. So this is a really good way of beginning to separate your colors if you're finding that they're a little bit muddy, or they're blending in a little bit too much. We can start to use the hue sliders, and if we were to take it to an extreme, Like if you put each of these color sliders to their extreme left or extreme right, you can see how much you change that color wheel. You know, how completely different it ends up looking. Okay, so it's a very powerful way of controlling color within Lightroom. Now we have another way of doing it as well. You'll see this little button here, okay, called this is, you can see it there. It just says adjust hue by dragging in the photograph. Now you'll find this in each of your options. But if I click this and I bring it over, it comes up with a little target. You can see this little target, and I can simply click on the color then, and if I move my mouse up and down, so just simply moving the mouse up and down, you can see how it's just changing the orange, or even the yellow, sorry, the yellow. Now because yellow has quite a bit of green in it as well, you can see that it's actually changing the green too. So some of these colors will blend with each other, and we'll break this down now in just a moment there as well. Okay, but hue is what we're going to be using to separate the colors a little bit more in our photographs. Now, if we have a look at these other options here as well, then we have saturation and we have luminance. Now, saturation, I think, is a very important one for photographers to understand. It is the level of color in your photograph. Now, the reason that I think it's a very important one to use is that if we click the black and white option here, it does a very quick black and white conversion for us, which is which is fine. But I think it's a lot better to do it manually. And the reason for this is that when we slowly strip away color from our photographs, we can understand what are the dominant colors in the shot, and also what are the colors that might be problematic for us when we take away the color. Okay, when we take away color, we're left with tone. And while colors might look dramatically different from each other, so for example, if we look at green and we look at blue, they're very different from each other, same yellow and red and so on. But when we start to take away the color, we're left with a tone. We might find that these tones are actually very similar to each other, and can make photographs appear very flat when they're converted to black and white. So by taking away the color, by slowly stripping it away, it'll help us to understand the tones in the photograph a lot better. So when I take away red, you can see here that there's still like a bit of color here. It hasn't gone completely grey. You know, there is still a very slight little bit of pink here, you know, in this area. So, you know, if I was to make a change then, say to the magentas, yep, there we go, and to the purples, they have a far bigger impact on this, you know, and there's actually quite a lot of orange that we can see there in the where that red was. If I move the red, sorry, the orange, there you go, we can see it's gone. You know, it's gone very grey now. So if you're looking at a photograph with a lot of red in it, you might find that manipulating the oranges actually has a massive impact on the red as well. If we slowly strip away the yellow, you can see there's still a touch there of green. So there's a little bit of a crossover in those colors, and then finally we've got the aqua, and we have the blue. So when we have removed all of the colors from the color wheel, now we're just left with tone, various shades of grey. And what we can see here is that they're quite similar to each other. Look at these tones over here. This is where our purples and our magentas and our blues were. These are incredibly similar. You can't tell the difference between them really at all. So, you know, if you had a photograph that had a lot of these colors in it, you know, blue, magentas, and purples, it would look very flat. It would look like a mass of grey. So we need to separate these tones from each other. This is called tonal separation, and this will add a lot of depth to your black and white photographs. So let's come to our final option then here, which is luminance. And luminance is the brightness of the colors. Okay, so this is also then the brightness of the tones. And when we've removed the color, we're only left with tones, so it just becomes the brightness of the tones. But if I was to say, just quickly bring back the red here, and I increase the luminance, I can increase the brightness or the darkness of the red. Okay, so you can increase the brightness or the darkness. So going over to the right hand side is brightening up the colors, going to the left is darkening down those colors. By taking away that color, you're just brightening and darkening the tones, and you can see how much that affects the color wheel here. So if I increase the brightness of that and say I reduce the brightness of the orange, you can see there's we're getting a bit of contrast happening there. Similarly then with the yellows, I'm going to increase the brightness, and again I'm just going left to right on these just to give you an idea, but you can mix it up whatever way you want. And you can see here how we've completely manipulated those tones as well. But we are also adding a separation between them. So this is a really good way to begin to deal with problematic areas in black and white photographs. I mean, one of the most problematic ones would be, say, if you think about greens in our photographs, like green, our eyes can differentiate the colors of green. You might have heard that phrase before, 40 shades of green, very much associated with Ireland, okay? And our eyes can differentiate those colors massively. But when we remove the colors, we find that those green tones are actually incredibly similar to each other and very, very difficult to differentiate. Having the ability to separate them by using tools like this is a massive advantage to us. So let's put this into practice. So we'll come to this photograph here, and what I want to do with this particular shot is that this was photographed on an autumnal day, and it doesn't look very autumnal. Okay, so I mean, when I photographed this at the time, there was lots of reds, there was lots of kind of oranges and browns and yellows. There was loads of color going on in the shot. Okay, now, but it looks quite green. There's a lot of green going on in the photo. We're not really getting those colors coming through in the picture. So what we'll do here first is our basic adjustments. So as usual, we'll start by clicking off the white balance, and we'll try to find somewhere in the photograph. Let's see if we can use this white point. That's a bit too warm. Okay, so we'll bring that down, and again, when in doubt, I usually go with the daylight balance, and that appears to be absolutely fine. It was shot during the daytime, in and around midday, so I think this is perfectly fine in terms of the white balance. The first place to start when it comes to sorry, I've just adjusted the tint there as well. The first place to start when it comes to any kind of separation is your basic adjustments. Now, looking at this, the exposure is good overall. I just want to drag out the blacks a little bit, just bring a little bit of blacks there into it, just add a little bit of depth to it. You could reduce the highlights ever so slightly to bring back some detail. Well, it's not having a massive impact ever so slightly, but all in all, there's not a huge amount that I need to do in terms of editing to this photograph. Really, the biggest issue here is trying to separate those colors. I'll add a little bit of vibrance there to it as well, maybe just a touch of clarity as well. Okay, so that's had a bit of an impact in it. Now, come to the Hsl then. So we click this down, we'll just close that down there as well. And we'll start by having a look at the hue of the photograph. Okay, so looking at the reds here, if I begin to manipulate the red, it's really just going to have an impact on that barge. Now, I like the color of the barge, so I'm going to leave that where it is. I'm going to leave that as a big red barge. It's a nice focal point to have in the photograph. Now, let's see if we start manipulating the oranges, and what we can see there, yeah, in the trees, it's having an effect. Now, it is also having an effect on the barge as well, because as we saw with red, there's a lot of orange in the reds too, and unfortunately this is something that we can't really avoid. Okay, but looking at it, if I go to the right, you can see it losing all those colors in the leaves, but certainly going there to the left has brought out a massive difference there already. We can see a lot more colors coming there in those leaves. It looks a lot better already, so I'll definitely bring that down a little bit, maybe just bring it back up a tiny bit. Yellow, a huge impact on the overall photograph. Okay, massive impact in the overall photograph. So if we're going over to the right hand side, you can see things begin to look a little bit unnatural, a little bit toxic. So we want to bring it down a little bit. Now you can see by moving it down into the left hand area, we're getting a nice kind of almost sepia tone to the whole photograph. But I don't want to lose those greens altogether, so I'll bring it back a bit. Now, then with green, okay, that's a nice effect. You kind of get a golden look with it there. Okay, makes it look a little bit kind of old-timey, I suppose, you know, kind of vintage, I guess. But we want to bring some of those greens there. We want to have a nice palette of colors there, so we bring those yellows down ever so slightly, and we can see much more going on now in the photograph. Okay, there's a lot more variety. I really like what's going on here at the top of the photograph. A lot of yellows, a lot of greens, a lot of oranges, and deep kind of browns coming in out there now as well. Now we can change the blue and we can change the magenta, but they're really not going to have any impact in this overall photograph at all. We can see that just by looking at the photograph. Now, so coming to saturation, if I felt any of the colors were a little bit lacking, you can boost them up a little bit with the saturation here. We'll boost up our three main colors, which seem to be the yellow, the orange, and the green. Okay, and then finally we can come to luminance then as well, and we can use this to really separate out the colors. Now I think they're, you know, it's looking good as is, but if you wanted to, you could brighten up the red of the boat, or you could darken it down. In fact, I think I will brighten it up a little bit. Now you can change those oranges and make them brighter. You could bring them down. You can see they begin to look a little bit muddy, you know, very unappealing there. So, you know, I think I'll leave those the way they were. Brightening up the yellows has a massive impact overall, and you can see bringing them down, it makes the photograph look very ugly indeed. Okay, so I think with the luminance sliders, I'd be much better off just leaving them as they are. Maybe just a tiny touch of brightness to the green. Okay, so let's have a quick before and after. And I mean, like that's that's, you know, I mean, you can see the impact there. We did very little changes in terms of the basic adjustments. Okay, so we corrected our white balance, added a tiny little bit of contrast to it, but really the majority of the work here has happened through those Hsl sliders, and you can see here it's brought out that autumnal feeling that I wanted here in the photograph when I captured it at the time, and it's just given everything an overall much more of punch. So much happier with the quality of that photograph now. So we can use this then and apply it directly to our black and white photographs as well. Now, so we've seen a photograph similar to this before with the swan. This one was just taken a little bit earlier on in that day. Now what we can see here, it needs a little bit of work. You know, there's a lot going on here in terms of the color, so I think it would make a good black and white photograph as well. So the first thing that we need to do then is our standard basic changes. This is a very contrasty photograph, so I think I'd bring up the highlights a bit. Actually, sorry, bring up the shadows there a bit. There we go, to bring out some of that detail that was being lost there. There's a massive change already. Might bring those highlights down ever so slightly to bring some detail back there in the sky. Similarly then we can raise the blacks ever so slightly and push those whites out a little bit more. So the photograph is overall just a little bit brighter, and maybe add a touch of clarity there to it as well. Now the vibrance won't really matter too much to us at the moment. So that's it. I mean, it's a wonderful color photograph as well, but we do want to work on it in black and white. Now, you could just do a quick conversion using the black and white option here, but as I said, that won't give you a full understanding of the problematic colors or the problematic tones that you might have in the photograph. So we're better off to strip them away ourselves. So we don't really need to worry about the hue sliders at the moment. We can dive straight in to those saturation sliders. So let's reduce down the red, and well, it's not really had a massive impact at all. It's taken some of the color away here from that tree there, but really otherwise not going to be a massive one. That's going to have a big impact when we start adjusting it in black and white. Take away the orange, and yes, has a big impact. Okay, so we can see just how much the photograph has that orange in it. So that is going to be one that when I start to manipulate the tones using the luminance slider will have an impact on the shot. Let's see, yellow. Yeah, yellow again. So a lot of this is all yellow. So I'm going to remove that. Yeah, it has a huge impact on the photo. Now you can see there's bits of green here, but really not a massive amount of green. But there's enough there happening in the yellows and the greens that we'll have to, as you can see, when I reduce them down to get all together, it just gets very busy here in the photograph. So separating those greens and yellows is going to be important. Our aqua should have a bit of an impact, not really much going on there at all. Blue, obviously, hugely impactful on, and you can see it there. You actually lose the detail there when I reduce the blue. Magenta, very little of it, and similarly then with the purple as well. Sorry, the purple and magenta. So the primary colors here, yellow, orange, and blue. These are the ones that I'm going to have to work on to get the most out of this. Now, as it is, it looks very well. I don't think it looks particularly bad at all, but let's see what we can do. So coming to the luminance slider then. So as we said, red doesn't have much of an impact, but as you can, well, you can lose that 3 if I reduce it down, but I'm going to bring it out a little bit. I want to make it stand out against all of this here in the background. The orange then will also have a massive impact too, and you can see, yeah, it's a giant impact that it's having on the photograph. Okay, so we're going to brighten up the oranges there a little bit as well. Now yellow. Okay, so the yellow is also having a big impact too. So we also want to brighten that up, but I might darken down those greens. Okay, so when I darken down the greens, it's adding a little bit more contrast here in this particular area. Then those blues. So reducing down those blues is going to be important. Now, as you can see, you can, if you wanted to have a nice bright sky, just increase the blue, but I want to bring it down. I don't want to go too far, because when I go too far, what you start to see here is this kind of clipping, and you get this weird kind of pixelization there as well. You lose the tonal quality in the gradient. It looks very, very ugly, very muddy. So we want to bring that up a little bit. Now, not too far, because we need to have some of that detail. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. Okay, and then as we saw, the purples and the magentas having a bit of an impact. I might actually increase those purples a bit. Okay, so, and then we've got the magenta really doing very little there at all. Okay, so you can see how we have brought out a huge amount of tonal separation then by manipulating these tones. And I might just bring those yellows down ever so slightly there as well. And it gives the eye a lot more to look at. It's a lot easier for the eye to separate what's going on here. Typically when you photograph these types of scenes and you see them in black and white, it can be very busy, very, very busy with all the kind of hedgerow and the brushwork and everything here as well. But I think this is looking okay in black and white. So with those changes made, okay, there's still a lot more that we can do with this. Now, at this stage, you might decide that you want to go back and do some modifications with your basic panel then as well. Okay, so we can still always come back to this part of it if needs be. Okay, so I can bring a little bit more detail back there by reducing down those whites. I think I'll put them back where they were. You can add more contrast there as well. Okay, so we need to bring up those whites a little bit. Okay, so I think that's looking rather good. But we can do a bit more now to this then as well. So at this stage, what's possible is that we can actually add effects to our photographs now as well. Now, one thing that I should have mentioned as well is that, I would always recommend that you actually start out by trying out the filters first. Okay, so, if you can get some really amazing effects by using these preset options over here on the left hand side, and there's a lot of black and white ones there available to you. Okay, so I'd always recommend that you check out those as a starting point, just to give yourself some ideas. But in the long run, you do want to be kind of making these changes yourself. So the next thing then to have a look at it is to add some effects. And the first thing we're going to do is to tone this photograph. Okay, we can tone the picture, and that's done by this process of split toning. If I click down split toning, Basically, split toning is the ability to be able to add two different colors, one color to the highlights and one color to the shadows. Now we can do this on black and white photographs, or we can do it on color photographs. So we'll do it on color photograph actually, when we've done it to the black and white one here. So I've got highlights, I've got balance, and I've got shadows. So if I add a color to the highlights, let's say we want to add a kind of a sepia tone to this photograph. I go to the yellow, okay, and now it's not added any color to it. That's because I haven't increased the saturation. So by increasing the saturation, you can see it brings in the color. And if I push it very, very high, I'm just going to push it to the extreme so you can understand what's happening here. Now I can choose a color for the shadows. Now I don't have to choose the same color. So say for example I choose blue. And if I increase the color, it blends the colors together and you get this split tone effect. So, I mean, that's now an exaggerated version of it. Now, you can control which one is dominant. So, you can change, if you want the highlights to be dominant, I can move the balance over towards the right-hand side. If I want the shadows to be dominant, I can move the balance over towards the left-hand side. Or I can just double-click it to bring it back to the middle. Now, what I'd like to achieve with this particular photograph is I'd like to have the saturation, we'll bring that down. I'd like to have a kind of a sepia tone to it. Okay, so we'll bring that down. Actually, that's quite nice. So mixing the blue and those yellows together, that's actually quite a nice effect now, I have to say. Let's see if we bring it down and give it the sepia tone there as well. That's also nice too. When you're toning your photographs, it should be subtle. Okay, I recommend, being quite subtle with it and not pushing it too high. I actually quite like that effect, that color there. It's given it an almost, it looks like an almost type of silver type of effect to the photograph, and it's very, very nice. Split toning really is a great way of adding your own effect, I suppose, your own style to your photographs. Now, we can apply it to our color photographs as well, so it's not something that's exclusive to black and white photographs. So, if you wanted to kind of, say you're into your Instagram, you wanted to kind of create an Instagram effect, let's say we add a little bit of blue to the highlights. Ooh, maybe not. Let's try a different color. We'll try a bit of yellow, but we balance that out again with a little bit of blue. That's a combination that I tend to like a lot. You can see you get this kind of vintage feel to the photograph. Okay, so you get a kind of a vintage look to the photograph when you blend those colors, and you can absolutely experiment yourselves, what way you'd like to do this. It gives it kind of a film effect, so that's a nice kind of bit of toning to it. I'll just do a quick before and after there again, and you can see it just makes it a little bit more unique. So split toning is a lot of fun, and this is something that you can save in your presets as well. So you can create kind of a preset, or a kind of split tone style for yourself, and you can save that then as a preset. So coming back then to our black and white photograph, then the last couple of things that we can do is we can add some grain to the photograph if we really want to replicate that type of film effect. And we can also add a vignette to it as well. Now there is something else here that I think would work well, and that is cropping the photograph. Okay, so if I come to, I'm just going to close down my split toning. If I come to the tools up here at the top, we have our cropping, our crop overlay. So we can click on the crop overlay and it gives us a couple of options. Okay, so you can change. You can just go back and reset it as shot if you want. You can go original, you can go custom, where you can crop it to whatever way you like. You've got some preset ones here as well, like 1:1 is a square crop, 4:5 or 10:8 inches, A4 there as well, and you can rotate these. So there's a few preset sizes there, but I tend to like to go with the custom. Now you want to unlock this here as well, so that you can actually edit it the way that you like. And what I'm going to do here is for me, this should be kind of a wide shot. Okay, so if I crop in a little bit from the bottom and a little bit from the top. Now, what we're also using here is the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds, you kind of got this grid here. You want elements in the photograph to fall somewhat near these intersections. Okay, so we've got the little swan here, and I'd like that to fall on or close to the intersection. It just kind of creates a more of a dynamic type of photograph. Okay, so just hit enter then to crop that, and I think that's looking a lot better. So with that crop done, and don't worry about the top of that tree there as well. I think it was actually a little bit distracting, so taking that off a little bit I think improves the photograph. I also think I might just bring that split toning down a little bit more, like it a little bit more subtle. Okay, now so we can now add a vignette, and we can also add some grain to it as well. So if I come down to my effects option here, we can add a post crop vignette, Now, lenses will naturally have a vignette to them, and a vignette basically is the darkening of the edges of the frame. Now, a post crop vignette is basically artificially adding a vignette to the photograph. So if I go to the left, you can see it adds a white vignette around the photograph. If I go to the right, it adds a darker vignette to the photograph. Okay, so white vignettes tend to be quite romantic looking. Darker vignettes tend to be a little bit more atmospheric. Now, one thing I will say about this is when you are doing vignetting to your photographs at all, try to exercise a little bit of subtlety. Okay, because quite often one of the things that I see when people start using these vignettes is that it's very, very easy to overdo them. Very, very easy to apply ones that are a bit too heavy. I'm going to apply a heavy one though, just to show you what you can do in terms of the other options here. So when you apply a heavy one, you can move the midpoint of it. That's how far out to the edges it goes. Or you can bring it in very, very close to the center. We then have roundness as well, so you can make a very circular type of vignette or more of a square type of vignette. And then we also have feathering as well, and if we should understand feathering at this stage. It's how hard or soft the edge of that vignette is there as well. Okay, so you can actually make a frame for your photographs there by reducing the feathering down. Now, highlights then, if I needed to bring back some details being lost in the vignette, I can increase the highlights there just to bring them back too. But in this particular case, I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that midpoint out a little bit. I'm going to have a nice kind of, I suppose, a soft edge to it, maybe a hard edge. It's quite nice having that nice frame there. Bring that really out far to the edges. We've got a nice frame then around the photograph. Okay, so we'll just go quick before and after just to get a sense of where we are at with this particular photograph. So we came from this color photograph now into this completely transformed black and white version of this, okay, with lovely bit of toning applied to it there as well. But we're not finished just yet. So the final thing then that we can apply to this particular photograph then is a little bit of texture, a little bit of grain. Okay, so if we really want to replicate that film effect to our photographs, we'll add a little bit of grain to it then as well. Now, one thing that quite often confuses students is the difference between grain and noise. Now, we're going to be having a look at noise reduction in the next lesson, but grain is an artifact from when we were shooting on film. If we were shooting on very high ISOs, that we'd actually see the light sensitive crystals of the film. Okay, so film was covered in emulsion. And emulsion was all these little light sensitive crystals that captured the light. Now, when we were photographing in low light situations, we needed to use higher ISOs, and basically this meant that the light sensitive crystals were much larger to be able to capture that light. Okay, so we would see the grain in the shots, and it's a nice aesthetic look to a photograph. Noise is different. Noise is a digital artifact. It's not a physical one, an analog one. Okay, so I don't think noise does not look well in our shots at all. So let's introduce a little bit of grain to the photo. So we're going to get in a little bit closer. Try to find a bit of the photograph where you can see a bit of the texture there. And when we start to introduce the grain, you should be able to see a little bit of texture coming there into the shot. Yeah, and you can see it there quite clearly. And that's quite a nice effect there as is. Okay, now we can change the size of the grain. When we change the size of the grain, the photograph becomes a lot softer. And you can see here it almost gets this type of pinhole effect. Or, you know, if you were photographing with a very old camera when things weren't very, very sharp, you know, you can increase the size of the grain to get that type of old vintage style. Now you can also increase the roughness of it there as well if you really, really want to push it into something quite eerie and almost spooky. You know, you get this really old, I suppose, Victorian style effect to it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring that down, and I'm also going to bring that down there as well. Put them to their defaults, because I thought the default look was perfect. Okay, I might just increase that grain a little bit more there as well. I like that texture that's coming there into the photograph. So you can see now that, and we just remove all the other parts of the screen here. We'll press the L just to get a better look at it there too. And it's a really lovely effect that we have applied to that, adding a subtle bit of grain, a subtle bit of toning and texture to it there as well, and we get a really old style looking, a vintage feel for our photographs. So now this can absolutely be then applied to our color pictures as well. You know, you can add a little bit of a vignette if you wanted to here too. It's not just something that has to be applied to a black and white photograph. You know, you can have a hard vignette around the edges if you want. Let's see how that looks in this particular shot. Yeah, okay, so it's not as effective there as I think as it was on the other photograph at all. So probably something more like a natural type of vignette is going to be better in this particular instance. Okay, so you can apply that there, and then of course we can apply a little bit of grain there if we wanted to get that effect here as well. And let's see if we push it there too and see how that looks. Okay, so interesting, you know, kind of effect to that particular photograph there as well. But I think for that one, probably better off just going with just the natural kind of look to it. Now, I see a lot of people asking me about the dehaze option here as well. Okay, so dehaze it's designed for removing haziness within a photograph, or perhaps you want to add a little bit of haziness to a shot. If you photograph on very, very bright days, you can sometimes get a very hazy effect in your images, and you can remove that with the dehaze. If I add a bit of dehazing here to the picture, it really bumps up the contrast to the photograph. Okay. If I go the other way, you get this kind of foggy effect to the shot. You're actually adding a little bit of haziness to the photograph, and you know, it can be used in a way to kind of, I suppose, add more of a dream-like effect or quality to the photograph. But I have to say, I haven't found a huge amount of use for it myself within Lightroom. I find it to be a very heavy tool, and I also feel that you can achieve the same effects or the same results with it by using the contrast options as well. Okay, so you can simply use those contrast options to you know, to remove that kind of hazy effect to the scene. Okay, so that's, I think, everything that we really needed to be able to do to this photograph now in this particular lesson. So you know, I'm sure you're really seeing the potential now in terms of what you could be doing with your own photographs now here as well. Every lesson we are adding a little bit more to what we can do to our shots. And if you're, as I said, if you're happy with all of this, you can save it as a preset. You know, so I can call this one, let's say if I call it black white underscore vignette, so I know what I used here. And you can see here then I can choose whichever options that I want to add to this. You can also add your graduated and radial filters. If you've applied those to the photograph, it is possible to do that. So if I create that, okay, I now have this black and white vignette, and I could come to this next photograph here and I could apply that to it. So let's see what happens. and the type of effect that I get. Okay, so it doesn't work as well on that particular photograph, but it's there ready for me to use whenever I wanted to. I'm actually going to save this effect here as well. I think it's a very nice effect too. So again, if I go to presets, and I'm going to call this one split underscore tone, and I'll just call it split tone wheel, just so I know that it's my one, and I can click create. And again, now I can apply that particular effect to any other photograph that I might have within my collection. So that's everything that we've needed to cover now for this evening's lesson. So I do hope that you enjoyed this, and I do recommend, as always, that you go back over this in your student login area to take your time with this as well. The most important thing I think to take away from this lesson is about tonal separation when you're editing your black and white photographs. It's very, very important to understand that it can be very, very difficult, that your tones can get lost very, very easily when we are working in black and white. So let's just quickly summarize what we had a look at in this lesson. So we explored hue, saturation, and luminance in great detail. We had a look at how to convert our photographs to black and white. And I do hope that you try this out. I think this is something that students don't do enough of nowadays. It's almost like, because we learn now using digital cameras, we learn taking color photographs. We kind of go back to black and white then, rather than in the past when I was learning photography. Certainly we started on black and white and then we learned color. So it's almost kind of, you're having to go backwards when you start looking, at black and white again. And determining what makes a good black and white photograph can take a little bit of time to master too. Now, it's something we do cover in great detail on our later modules on the photography course, the advanced photography course. We have a look extensively at what makes a good black and white photograph. So if you're really interested in that part of it, it's definitely worth checking out, maybe moving on after this course onto the more advanced photography modules. We had a look at how to add effects, things like grain, things like vignettes. We also had a look at split toning as well. Split toning is a great one for kind of developing a unique look to your own photograph.